A lot of people are talking about capitalism these days in the news. Is it good? Is it bad? Is socialism any better, any worse? Maybe we should just let Trump have all the money and be done with it. But if you wanted to, I'm not saying you'd be interested, but if you wanted to, if you had the itch to see capitalism on a kind of human level, microscopic, but not so microscopic that you can't see it, you could find a picture-perfect kind of example of capitalism right here in the United States of America. But you'd have to look closer than that. In fact, you'd want to look in Washington, D.C., east of downtown, north of the National Arboretum, described by the Maryland-Washington, D.C. border on the northeast and South Dakota Avenue northeast to the southeast. Wait, what? Were you to go to Fort Lincoln, you would, of course, have terrific access to the Costco and the Lowe's and the PetSmart. You might live in one of the lovely condos that line Fort Lincoln Drive Northeast, which could take you north and south and east and west. It's a strange little community, but perfectly capitalist, with all of its seedy underside kept hidden away, stashed under... Which brings me to the DC Home Storage, a big use-store-it kind of facility up against New York Avenue Northeast. And yes, that one heads east and west. Where the north comes in, Have you looked at a map of Washington? DC Home Storage isn't a particularly flashy storage unit. No sign spinners or wavy arm guys. No neon. No billboards. Actually, to be honest, DC Home is going broke. Like many storage units, DC Home started up in the late aughts, which they ought not to have done. Sorry, couldn't help it. And in the past decade, storage units have been opening like gangbusters, so many that, yep, DC Home has fallen on hard times. But then so has DC. So has a lot of our nation. When people lose their homes and they see those nice big storage units just sitting there, well, it would kind of be like living in someone's garage on the 5th floor. It's illegal to rent storage units to people for the purpose of residing. Even if the folks at DC Home let them live there, they couldn't charge rent without the constant worry of doing hard time in the big house or perhaps some kind of fine. And like many in the self-storage business, they are being told through informative websites aimed at their demographic that if they don't call the police right away, immediately, prontissimo quick, well, they might end up in jail too. The folks at DC Home are not a family. This isn't a family business. It's actually owned by a company that invests in No, that's not important. What's important, or I should say that the person who is really important here is Tony. He's the guy in the front office. He's the guy who cleans the place. He manages the books. and books the ads, and adds the accounts, and accounts for the, well, there's less and less to account for every year, which you would think makes his job easier. Just two problems. Tony is, well, he's not exactly a citizen. Tony's short for Antonio. Actually, he's not exactly sure what he is. He started his paperwork for citizenship back in the early 90s when he could count how many steps it took to become a citizen. Have you checked recently? Have you seen how difficult it really is? Of course you haven't. Why should you? But if I were to ask you, how welcoming would you say the Trump administration has been towards anyone who isn't white or rich or white and rich? What do you think your answer would be? Anyway, Tony has been working at this job since it first opened, with the agreement that he get paid under the table. And this was fine with the folk at DC Home because then they could not pay for his health insurance, not give him sick pay, not put anything away in a pension or Social Security were Tony eligible, and won't he feel stupid if he is? But he had to, because he's got this kid. And this kid makes up for all of that. Her name is Daisy. Yes, I know, strange name, but her mother was a hippie from upstate New York. She said she would marry Tony, and then he woke up one morning and they weren't married. And she weren't there anymore. So he got the job at DC Home. And when Daisy started asking him about the people on the property at night, the people in the halls, the people with the hungry, crying baby, the people who ran away when they saw her coming, well, that was when he knew he couldn't just ignore it anymore. So he called them all out, called them all together in the parking lot, not the one in the front where a drive-by might catch sight of them, back in the back, by the garage. He went up and down the floors. Tony isn't a bang on the door kind of guy. He would just stop and knock, just a little tap. He'd say, "Hello? Buenos dias? Hola? Bonjour? Buongiorno?" Eventually someone would answer, and he was getting pretty good at getting them to answer before he ran out of greetings. He didn't know Sherry Finn, or Sean, or Old Herbert, or even Alicia. But he always remembered their unit because he knocked on that door and a teenage boy exploded inside. "We've all been caught!" Tony took them outside. There had to be at least 30 of them, like rats. That's how his bosses wanted him to think of them, as rats, vermin taking up, empty space. These were people in need, desperate people who were cold and afraid, probably hungry. He said, "I knew there were people living in the... But this many? How could it be this many?"
"A point of order, Your Honor."
An old lunatic named Old Herbert spoke up in his best foghorn leghorn. No, seriously, that was his best.
I do believe, Your Honor, that the public storage offer 201 houses at present no fewer than 14 families, which translates into, well, I suppose that must be at least 50 residents.
"There's a disease," Tony told them, interrupting old Herbert, not, oh, I can say this as an atheist. I really hope to God, not for the last time. Tony looked at all the tired faces. It was 3 p.m, after all. Tony figured they'd all be awake, but people in a storage unit are like people in any windowless room. Their body clocks go all kaflooey. Tony asked the crowd, "Have you heard about coronavirus? COVID-19? You're supposed to be in your homes. I'm supposed to call the police on you. Don't you understand that? Don't you?" Daisy wasn't there to see Tony's frustrations, which, let's be honest, is probably why he let it get to the point where he was practically jumping in place. He really didn't know what to do. Hell, that was obvious even to Sean, which is why he gave Sherry a push. And she looked at him like he was crazy, of course, but hell, who's sane anymore anyway? Sherry stepped forward and asked timidly, "Excuse me." Tony looked over at her, at the hand she held out in a gesture of friendship. "See, that's exactly the kind of thing we're not supposed to do anymore," Tony told her. "No shaking of hands, or other body parts. No closeness. No..."
"It would seem they are depriving us of everything that makes us feel human. Shelter, food, basic friendship."
Old Herbert took Sherry's hand and put the other hand out to Tony. And it would seem indelicate to continue doing the voice he was doing. He said, "We are nothing more than a human community, with all the foibles and indelicacies held therein. Without animosity or greed, without anger or hatred for any. We simply wish to survive. Now, I won't say we haven't been expecting you or some entreaty from the opposing side. But I will say I welcome you more genuinely than I would any of your owners, or any of our owners, who may not own our bodies, but certainly own our debt, and our public utilities, and our public airwaves, and our public interest. And I suppose that makes them as much our owners as anything, doesn't it? So, you have a decision, and it will not be an easy one. And I know you can't charge us rent, but we have spoken among ourselves at the idea of a gift of sorts. Not a bribe, because we don't have enough for a bribe, but some gesture of friendship. What do you say? Shake on it?" Tony looked at old Herbert. He looked at old Herbert's hand. He said, "We can't." Old Herbert said,
"Oh, I'm sure we can, just as sure as I'm here."
Tony said, "We can't."
"Open your heart to it."
"We can't."
"Just take my hand."
"I can't take any hand, because to take your hand would expose me to
an unending pile of lawsuits, I am sure,"
old Herbert told him.
"But we can't let fear of..."
"Disease," Tony insisted. "It's a disease." And old Herbert replied,
"Poverty most certainly is, but so is racism and hate and bigotry and wealth. But we will fight it together."
Which is when Sean took Tony's hand and put it in old Herbert's. And old Herbert hadn't washed in quite some time. It didn't end well. Washington, D.C. has its hands in all our homes. Welcome to D.C. Home. Until next time, be good to yourself, be kind to others, and let's make this world a better place. This is Ken LaSalle, and I just wanted to thank you for stopping by for this episode of DC Home. For more information about myself and the work I do, I invite you to take a look at my website at kenlasalle.com. You can also find me on Amazon, Audible, iTunes, and anywhere you find ebooks, paperback books, and audiobooks online. That's also where you'd find DC Home Season 1, available in ebook and in audio. You can also find me on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube by searching my name, Ken LaSalle. And thank you, as always, for your support.